Good morning, everyone. And on behalf of the priests and deacons here at the cathedral and the entire staff, I want to wish all of you and your family members a very happy 4th of July. Happy 4th of July, everyone. We had a little presentation at the beginning of Mass from the Knights of Columbus to remind us that wonderful Catholic fraternal organization was primarily responsible for the United States of America changing the Pledge of Allegiance and including 60 years ago the phrase "under God." Before 1954, the Pledge of Allegiance did not contain those two words. But now, when we say the pledge, we say one nation under God. What does a nation under God look like? Well, first, I think we need to turn to our gospel. And here we find our Lord telling us what ought to be at the heart of one nation under God. Here the Pharisees come to Jesus and they try to trap him. They try to trap him to get him to decide between honoring God or honoring Caesar. And it's interesting to note that what I think our Lord does is that he kind of turns the trap back onto them. Because there's a very, I think, clear, although not explicit, hint about what one nation under God ought to look like. And what our Lord is implying in his answer is that the Jews would not be under the tax of the Romans if they had truly been one nation under God. The fact that Rome was now ruling over Israel was a sign of the sin and infidelity of Israel. If Israel had been giving God his due, they would not be subject to the yoke of the Roman rule. And you see, there is the heart of one nation under God, giving God his due. And that often we have difficulties within a nation, including our own, not because it's God's design, if you will, or direct will, but because we have refused to subject ourselves to God. We have refused to live as a nation under God. And then what our Lord does is that he says, "Give me a coin." And the coins of Jesus' time, of course, had an image on it, and it was the image of the emperor. The coins themselves were minted by the Roman authorities. And so Jesus says, well, that's his rightful property. Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. It's his. It even has his image on it. Give it back to him. But, and here's the rub, and this is also at the heart of one nation under God. He says, give to God what belongs to God. And where in the world do we find the image and likeness of God? Where is the image of God stamped in our world? The book of Genesis tells us, here, in our souls, we are made in the image and likeness of God. We belong to God. So Jesus says, if we're going to be one nation under God, of course, we must give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, but give to God ourselves, our lives, our past, our present, and our future, our decisions, who we are, to him. When we do that, we give right worship to God. We return to him what belongs to him from the very beginning. You and I, our lives. Now, our Lord provides us, as I said, with kind of what the heart of one nation under God ought to be. But what does it look like specifically? How does it play itself out in our nation? If we are going to remain a nation under God, we must realize that it doesn't come automatically. Being a nation under God is a task for every generation. And I would say that there are three basic characteristics, specifically in our nation, Three qualities by which we will know and be a nation under God. The first is, a nation under God, our nation under God, will look like this. It will contain citizens who are not afraid to act according to their faith in all circumstances, public and private. Archbishop Chaput wrote a book called Render Unto Caesar, and he says something very challenging. Listen to it carefully. He says, if we really believe God exists, that belief will inevitably color our personal and public behavior, our actions, our choices, and our decisions. And so therefore, we will not remain silent about our faith. So a nation under God really believes God exists and are not afraid to act according to that belief in everything. The second quality of our nation being under God is that it will be a nation in which citizens who love God will love Him in their selfless acts of service toward their neighbor. This is why Pope Francis is placing such a great emphasis on the love of neighbor, because we see God in our neighbor. We live out our love for God by way of loving our neighbor, especially the needy, the poor, and the abandoned. One nation under God is immensely interested not in ourselves, but in others. The farther away we are from a true solidarity from the unborn, from the poor, from the elderly, the more a nation promotes a culture of death, a culture of selfishness, a culture of the idolatry of wealth, honor, power, and pleasure, the farther away it is from God, and the farther away it is from being under Him. But just the reverse is true. The more that we are close to the unborn, the elderly, the poor, the more we promote a culture of life, of selflessness, the more we put into our priorities keeping the wealth, honor, and power into their proper places, the closer we are to God, the more we are one nation under God. And finally, one nation under God looks like this in our country. It will be citizens who will prioritize their worship of God and their prayer life, their personal prayer life, their family prayer life, even to the expense of those things that the world think is important. So we prioritize the worship of God and our prayer life by not spending so much time being concerned about my money, my time, my interests, but making sure that first we give honor to Him. Our recognition that we are under one God is going to be in direct proportion to how full our churches are on Sunday and how many knees bend in the privacy of our homes. The more our nation is under God, the more our churches will be full. The more people will be praying personally and as a family every day. The less our nation is under God, the more empty our churches will be. The less people will be praying individually and as a family. So, my brothers and sisters, may we always be a nation under God. I end with these words coming from the president in 1954, President Eisenhower, who sent a message to the Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus, Luke Hart, in order to thank him for his initiative in getting the United States of America to include in its Pledge of Allegiance one nation under God. And he wrote to the Supreme Knight these words: "We are particularly thankful to you for your part in the movement to have the words 'under God' added to our Pledge of Allegiance. These words will remind Americans that despite our great physical strength, we must remain humble. They will help us to keep constantly in our minds and hearts the spiritual and moral principles which alone give dignity to man, and upon which a way of life is founded. Being a nation under God, my brothers and sisters, is not a given. It's a task of each generation. If it indeed is our way of life, upon which our way of life is founded, with God's grace and our effort, our nation will always be under